Hello, everyone. So glad that you can be with us today. I'm telling you, we are going to rock it with Ed Porter. But I also, know what's going out in the world today. And I certainly want to ensure that, everyone understands and that we know that our hearts and our prayers go out to the people of Ukraine and everything that is going on over there. And while there's so much happening over there, there's still time for us to talk about, what's happening here and how we're going to be changing and transforming leadership into the future. So, without further ado, I want to welcome my guest today, Ed Porter with Blue Chip CRO. So, Ed, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Paula, and excited for you to kick off these LinkedIn Lives. So that's great.
It's going to be fun. This is the second one, and I've got people booked out into August now. So we'll be
Nice.
doing this every Monday. I do have a special one coming up on Friday, this Friday, with Colby Jubenville.
Nice.
Sorry. He's a PhD down at the University of Texas. But, Ed, I was just spent the week with you at the AAISP. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, let's tell me a little bit about you, what you do, and what you learned, a couple of things at the Leadership Summit.
Yes. So we just spent a week in Chicago at AAISP's Leadership Summit, which is fortuitous because it was 7 years ago, I think, at that same summit where you and I met. And you asked a question in the hall about distribution sales. And I was working for building an inside sales team for a distribution company. I stalked you out of the big ballroom. And lo and behold, we both live in the same city in Columbus, Ohio. What are the odds? And you were my partner in crime in restarting the Columbus chapter. So I think last week was a momentous occasion, not only to bring the summit back in person, but also celebrated an anniversary for you and I of knowing each other. So yes, last week was a great week. It was my first in-person conference. Ed Porter, Blue Chip CRO, and what I've been doing for the past almost 3 years is a fractional chief revenue officer. I've spent my career through each of the functional areas within the revenue organization, from sales to marketing to customer experience and operations. And now I get to do that and help companies build these teams. And I'm a little disappointed that the title has been misused so much, and there's still a lot of debate on what it is that a CRO does. But ultimately, what I'm trying to preach and what I'm trying to help educate clients from my own experience and opinion is that it's somebody who's focused on the full revenue life cycle, from marketing to sales to ongoing post-sales customer experience and the operations involved in between. I think in order to figure out a solution to a problem, you really need to look at the bigger picture. And also, as it relates to a lot of what you talk about in leadership, is understanding not only bringing your full self, but looking at the full picture. Don't just bring your experience and your skills. Rely on your emotions, your intelligence, your personality, and bring that to the table too. The same is true in a revenue organization. Is don't just develop a marketing plan. Look at how the marketing plan impacts sales and your customers. What customers are you serving and how are you solving their problems? Go market to those customers, go find those customers, and go sell those customers. So that's generally what I work on with clients. Is people say they have a sales problem, and when I work with them, it winds up being less of a sales problem and it's more of a customer success, customer experience problem, or it's a marketing problem, and sales is kind of sandwiched in between because we got the number, we got the quota, right? So it's on us to deliver. So that's what I've been doing, and I love it.
And I absolutely agree with you. And you're fantastic at that. It's amazing where we started 7 years ago, right? Both leading inside sales departments to really going out into entrepreneurship and seeing how the market is changing. And I love the CRO aspect of it because, quite frankly, having that revenue generating portion of it is a lot of what we used to do, with win backs and customers and speaking to customers and customer success and the voice of the customer, along with sales and along with marketing. So I agree with you 100% that you really have to bring the whole position into that space if you're really going to grow it. And I believe Decision Labs is doing weren't they doing uh, a brain function survey on win-backs and how people really should target win-back customers?
I know they were doing a lot in the booth, and I thought it was really interesting stuff that they're trying to bring to the table. I don't know specifically if it was about winbacks, but I remember you doing this campaign years ago and trying to think about, even with your team as well as my team at the time, is we tended to be that kind of single point of contact to a customer, whether
Mhm.
it was a sales question, a product question, a return, a customer's. I mean, we were the one-stop shop, and that's, to me at least, what I started to really understand about how do you manage the full life cycle. And it's not just about selling somebody something and then buying, but it's more about what does that buying experience look like? How do they
Mhm.
become aware of you and aware of your products? When you're selling thousands of different products to a customer, you're constantly marketing. So how do you do that properly? How do you get them into the sales process? And then how do you get them into serving? And now we're taking that one step further, which I know B2B Decision Labs talked about, which is less about the sales process and more about the buying process, and understand, what does your buyer want to go down? Don't put them through a channel or put them through your own internal check boxes. How do they buy? Excuse me. How do they consume your product or your service? Or how do they want to buy? You may selling commodity products, you may be selling something very niche. And I think that's a big thing that was a topic, a learning experience from last week, was understanding the buying process, and how do you adapt your sales process to a customer, and knowing that it's very, very dynamic. It's not the same. A buyer is going to buy differently. So I do know that they talked a lot about that, and I saw several speakers talking significantly about the buying process and understanding your buyer and not forcing your own process on them.
Right. I think that's a great point. And if anyone is looking for a fractional CRO, somebody to come in and look and evaluate your company, my 100% recommendation would be Ed Porter out of Columbus, Ohio.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
congratulations on that. Now, let's talk about this next generation of leaders, about bringing your whole self. We've heard people talking about having to bring empathy and transparency and authenticity to the role, but not everybody has that deep within them. What do you see is is the next generation leader going to be look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question when you say look like, and I think that can mean a lot of different things. How do you look on paper, and then how do you look in person? And the difference being, the what I've really subscribed to, what you've talked about in your book, is this, the side B, and what that means. And when I reflected on that, when you went down this journey of trying to put something on paper, you talked a lot about this, and I reflected on my own leadership journey to understand what made me a different leader. And I feel very fortunate. In the very beginning, I worked for somebody I didn't like at all. And I vowed to never want to be that person. And that person was very much the guy behind a locked door. They managed by numbers. I was a number, not a person. And I'm a very outgoing and personal person anyway.
That's
And and that's what never wanted to be that way. And when I start to think about each time I've been given an opportunity in a leadership position, what I've done and how I've done it, a lot of that is, it's my personality that I'm bringing to the equation. We hear a lot in sales, people buy from people. The same is true in the workplace, is people manage people. And
Mhm.
that's just how companies are built. And that's the big important part to understand, is don't force yourself to be someone you're not.
Right.
Embrace who you are, and bring that to work. If you are an emotional person, don't apologize for that. There's it's okay. In fact, that's real and authentic. Does everybody respond positively to that? No, absolutely not. Will some people? Absolutely. And I guess it doesn't really matter who does and who doesn't, as much as this is who I am, and knowing that every person you work with in life is going to have pros and cons, and those pros and cons are going to be different, but it's how you adapt and work with those people. And that's why I believe yeah, there's a line between professionalism, of course, but
Of
if you're
course.
if you're a funny person, be funny. If you're not a funny person, don't try and force the needle to be funny. If you genuinely care about people and you want to be, somebody calls off because they're sick, I think it's okay to ask them, is everything okay? There's HR people that say, no, you can't because you're infringing on, well, then let them make that decision. And I'm sure we can debate about that, but I'm
Yeah.
genuinely interested in caring. And when people call off, I just want to, hey, don't worry about work. Is everything okay? Are you all right? When
Right.
somebody sounds like crap, hey, sounds like you're nursing a cough. Why don't you take the next couple of days off? If you need to punt some calls, go ahead. So I think it's just, but not everybody has to be that way. If you're not that inquisitive of a person, don't feel like you gotta change. So I think that's the big one that I've learned, is to just embrace who you are, embrace your personality, embrace things that are important to you, and don't be afraid to let your little light shine. And I think people will obviously respond to that because you're working for people and not, this line in between manager and employees. So I think that's a big part of what the next generation leader looks like, is
I think
bringing your personality.
Yeah, I think it's taking that both and approach that I'm so serious about. There's a time for your leadership hat. There is a time for your data hat, but there's also a time for and if I'm correct, I believe you tapped out at gracious and kindness and courage and trustworthy in all of the assessment that you took for your side B, and being that kindness and knowing that you are intentional about it, which kindness, by the way, is the harmonica. I just like to let people know that. If you're intentional about that, then what can happen is you can you can tap into that side B, kindness, and know that that's how you're going to be remembered. You're not going to be remembered for your 8 to 10% growth over prior year, or your your regional manager of the year, or your big score on the biggest sale that you've gotten for the company. You're going to be remembered by your employees that you were kind, that you were gracious. And that's really where I think that people are looking for now. And we talked about a lot of this at the summit, of what the employees are looking for from their managers. Get out of that office and go walk to the forward facing, client facing teams and ask questions. Would you agree?
Yeah. So, and I think you're right. There's a place and time for all of those things, or to wear those different hats. And I had the manager that was the guy behind a closed door. I've been that guy too. I've been that guy, unfortunately, that's been behind a door and stuck in my office a lot. And it does feel a little bit closed off. And when people start asking, hey, is everything okay? Well, yeah, everything's fine. Why? But they're noticing something different that I don't even notice. So again, it's those things when you start building these relationships, and it's a little different now, with where the world is, and more and more people and companies are going remote. How do you continue to build those relationships remotely? And I'll say there's no silver bullet. There's no like, here's the formula. I think everybody has talked about different tips and tricks that work, but ultimately what we're trying to do with these tips and tricks is to facilitate engagement, and knowing that how Paula interacts with somebody is not the same as how Ed interacts with somebody, or Jim or Jane. They interact differently. So that's the biggest appeal. And I guess that's the call that I would ask any leader. You don't even really need to be a leader. As any person, is just focus on the other party, and how do you adapt to their style, and be that better person, whether it's a peer, a subordinate, a superior, whatever it may be,
Mhm.
is understanding there's not a one size fits all. And how do you appeal to how each one wants to learn? In fact, one of the topics, I couldn't remember what session it was last week, but it was a panel, and one of the panelists, we talked about employee onboarding and understanding that process, and it winds up being very much a, hey, how do you like to learn? How is your best way to learn? And maybe these people don't know, and it's okay. We've got a couple different learning mechanisms. We have an online one, we have Zoom calls, we have phone calls. Go through several and see what you like. And I thought that was a brilliant way to onboard somebody. Is, again, you don't take them through your own onboarding process. You figure, how do they like to learn? We have avenues that you can learn in all of them, consume what you like, and then how do we continue to adapt and get that person feeling like they're being supported individually. So I kind of went a little bit on a soapbox, but ultimately the point that I want to drive home in this is how do you adapt to other people, and knowing that it's them that make the difference, and you're just kind of either the facilitator or you're on board for the ride, one of the two.
It's people, right?
It really is.
Interestingly enough, it's those micro educations, whether they're Zoom or video or all of that are really going to tap into that. As I think Tyler on here said, interestingly enough, the bigger picture is harder to look at. So when we're looking at our whole self, and I call that the musical mindset. Now, some people might call that the artistic mindset, but whatever it is, a hiker's mindset or swimmer's mindset. But what it is, it's really tapping in and using both sides of your brain, right? And freeing up some space for that creativity, for that focus, and for the innovation that could help a company grow just by turning on a little bit of music and understanding and being intentional about that music. If you're in a bad mood, it could help calm you down. If you're in a good mood, it can pump you up. Or if you need to motivate your people, walk around and kind of dance and sing a little bit. Be that energizing leader if it's authentic to you, like you said. What do you think about leaders coming out and really getting involved with all of their employees?
Well, that's a loaded question. But again, I think if you're bringing who you are as a leader is very tough to define. So who I am as Ed Porter versus who am I as Ed Porter as a leader. In the beginning, it's tough to really figure those things out. And some people want to separate. But then I feel like, at least I have, as I gotten older and more experienced, more mature, the lines start to blend and you want to be the same person, whether you're leading or not. So to that point, I think again, we focus on engagement and how do you engage with your employees, whether it's your direct employee, an indirect employee, a team member on somebody else's team. I don't believe that there's a difference, but I do believe it's important to get to know employees, but get to know them on a level that they're comfortable with. Some may go deeper and tell you about how their family came from another country and immigrated here, and that's wonderful. And if they are open to that, facilitate it. How do you facilitate an environment or an arena that they're comfortable with bringing that information to? But it's not always appropriate for you to ask. And I think that line is, you can feel like you can ask, you can present it out there, but ultimately the employee's got to be comfortable enough with the environment. The trust has to be there. And I think that's okay for some to give you more insight than the others. But I do believe that it's a leader's responsibility to cultivate the ways that their team wants to not only engage with each other, but also with their manager or even cross-functional teams. So it is a responsibility for the leader to cultivate that. But again, knowing that it's not one size fits all, and go to where the people want to be comfortable with in terms of sharing and opening up. That also is true if you look at employee satisfaction surveys. I'm sure many companies do surveys, and there's still a resistance of trust of, it may be anonymous, but I'm clicking a link that was sent to my email, there's probably not as much anonymity as I think, or at least that's the impression. So if that trust isn't there for the company, then how do you expect to elicit the best responses? So this was at a previous company I was with. The company did take a pretty aggressive stance to understanding what their employees said and how they said it, and it was a little bit about how you interacted with your direct manager, what your thoughts were on the executive leadership. And I can't say that there was the silver bullet to fix everything, but at
Mhm.
least the steps were taken to try and get as much anonymous information so that it could be addressed. I think it's tough in those climate surveys to do it, but if it all stems from the foundation of how do you build trust? Trust is built at different levels, at different speeds, through different people. And how do you facilitate those environments? I don't have the answer to any of these questions, but I can start kind of working through it. So what Tyler commented earlier about, the big picture is hard to see. What's also hard in that big picture is removing your bias and assumptions. A lot
Yeah.
of times we're left to those things. So how do I create this more open ground to get Paula to talk at a level she's comfortable with, but know that somebody else may be will have no problem sharing their most personal details. But I think that's where I start to take the levels of how comfortable are they, and then how can I work with each individual as opposed to a one size fits all approach.
I love that. I love that, Ed, because what I see is as we have these emerging leaders, these high potential leaders, they're not being developed this way. We need to develop them so that they have that awareness of what's naturally inside of them, whether it is curiosity and asking questions, or kindness, or courage, or trustworthiness, things that are naturally within them that we can bring to the forefront of their leadership so that they have that both and approach. So they're really growing all their resume building skills, but they're also growing their character skills. And that's the side B. And while we develop this, it's so focused on data and resume building skills that some people, like you said, don't know what a unique leader somebody could be because they begin to climb the ladder and get into this echo chamber, right? Of always giving the same response or doing the same thing as their person or their peer. So how do we tap into music, or how do we tap into our side B so that we can change the thought that it's okay to have diversity of thought at the table, that you're not being challenged, but you're being open to listening to different and new and innovative ideas.
So I may I may very well, I'm going to be cognizant of time, but I may very well go on a soapbox here
Yeah.
because this is a topic that I've become involved with, especially with women in sales and diversity, and trying to think about that and just understanding myself more what minorities go through when they're the only one at the table, and how are they compartmentalized, or how are they, their opinions or views differ. So I think there's a line here, and the biggest point I want to make in this is that it's extremely difficult to try and give somebody a way to say, how do you get a seat at the table? Or how do you express your opinion or belief in a way that's non-confrontational or non-offensive? And I don't have an answer because it's playing to who your audience is. If you're a woman in a room full of white men, I have no idea what you would say or how you would say it, and I would never claim otherwise. But I can say that a lot of these efforts that are going on, trying to promote women in tech, women in sales, women in leadership, you name it, there's a lot of things going on, and that's wonderful for the people who are creating this and bringing awareness to an issue. The solution is unfortunately up to us. It's up to the white men. We have to change, and we have to embrace. So I don't want to make this necessarily a diversity topic, but I think that it's very similar. because it's about how do you make your point, or how do you bring your point up, or make your point so that it's received in a better way. And that always is going to depend. It's going to depend who the person is receiving it. Is it a person who is open and honest, or is trustworthy? Is it this person that has all these side beat traits, that is aware of them and has cultivated them? That communication, it's a lot easier for Paula to speak up to somebody who is embracing that, or to a team or a room. Whereas if they haven't, that process is completely changed. How do you do it? So I think the challenge is now, when we talk about music and what it does and how this brings out a different side to you, this will resonate with everybody. And I think you even talked about in the beginning of your book, and don't quote me the song, but you were singing a song in the car one day, and after you got done singing, you just busted out laughing.
Yeah.
And I think the realization is
Fly by.
you talked about.
Yeah, fly like an eagle.
Fly like an eagle. Yeah. And the realization is you connected that to a memory or to an experience. So those are different things that as leaders, we can start connecting to experiences. People learn in a plethora of different ways. And there's some science behind it, of course, and you can go down different learning styles, but it's also association. So I think there's a lot of that. So how do you bring it? Again, you talked about this too, which is, if you're a music fan, bring it. There's a couple people on LinkedIn that do songs, and they make recordings of songs and change the lyrics and parody different songs related to sales or marketing. And it's like, if that's you, own it, go do it. If it's not, don't feel like you have to do it. So the soapbox I want to get on, that I'll step back from here in a little bit, is that how you go about change is going to be different to yourself, and then also to the other people. How I bring my authentic self is going to be, I got to profile the room a little bit. I got to learn who I'm talking to and talking with, or I got to learn who my manager is, or what makes him or her tick, and what makes him or her trust me. And that's just something that you need to learn how to work with other people. Once you know that, then you can start bringing these things into place. That may be getting ready for a demo by putting on a playlist that you've made on Spotify, because this gets me in the mood and this gets me going and I'm amped up. And that's great. Own it. If it's somebody that just needs to sit back and just needs to calm and relax because they get very nervous on a call, maybe that type of music is classical. Maybe it's jazz. Maybe it's opera. They just need to kind of find their zen before they get into a point where, all right, I'm ready to go. So how they bring that is I think respective to the person, and then again respective to who's your audience, who are you, and how do you find this in between. And it's that, all I can say is be cognizant of that. It starts with awareness, and when you become aware of who you are, who your audience is, then you can start down the journey of how do I meet them in the middle instead of forcing my agenda or pulling their agenda.
Absolutely. And I think I think a couple people even said on here, Ed just hit the nail on the head. Music is the universal language. It is the only language that we all can experience and feel in many different ways. And there's no judgment in it. So next week, let's actually Friday, special one, we'll have that coming up, Colby Jubinville, and very excited about that. Ed, I want to thank you. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. I could talk for hours and hours about this. I love what you're doing. I love the book that you've put out, and I'm hoping that people, when they read this or look at this, to be able to associate, this isn't just for leaders. It's for people, and how to hone your interpersonal skills. But it is focused on how to bring yourself to the equation and understand your interpersonal skills, the emotional side of you. So thank you for putting something like this together. I think the world needs to see it and hear it. And just let me know when you go on tour.
Yeah, and be intentional about it.
Yes.
Thanks, Ed.